Yes, go.
Hello, hello.
Got it, man. It's another week with the organic wormhole. Like to welcome everybody. Eagle's got to dip out. He's got a bunch of shit going on. So appreciate you, Eagle, firing it up and getting us going. And we got Medically Fit and the Pharmacy Seed Network hanging out. Harrelson, what's up, guys? How you doing?
Good. How you doing, Smiley?
Good, man. It's been a busy week. I don't know about you guys, but I had a doozy of a week as well. So
Yeah, what you got going?
just at work and I don't know. It's been a busy week. That's all.
Freaking life, man. It's a busy thing.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
It definitely makes sometimes where the garden will suffer for that too. I know I've run into that a few times this last round. Awesome. You're busy and you think, fuck, I just watered them yesterday. But no, it was 2 days ago. And now all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and by the time you're thinking you need to water them, they're all drooping and I didn't get in there and it's just
Dude, and now with the LED lights, I'm like a 24-hour turnaround sometimes. I'll water them and like the next day I'm checking the pot, it's light, and I'm like, uh-oh, wow, really? Okay, we gotta recalibrate everything again here with the lighting.
Well, it seems like days kind of bleed into the other one, and then next thing you know, 2, 3 days have gone by, and oh shit, I gotta get in there and water. And like that's the shit part about being busy and having a life outside of cultivating cannabis. And it's tough to juggle both of it sometimes. Sometimes your plants are gonna suffer. That's why I've talked about many times on how to like get your plants to recover through the suffering that we self-induce because it happens a lot. I know sometimes that, like, if I want to go on vacation, I've got to water heavy before I leave, and I can't be gone more than 4 days because the fourth day I have to be almost back to water again. And that's kind of shit part. I don't trust somebody else to come to do it because I've had shit fucked up.
It's very specific. Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And I was thinking about that too. I'm gonna be doing some commuting now with some of the projects that are coming up this spring. And I'm like, man, I think I'm gonna have to like give everything a heavy watering, dial airflow back a little bit, and maybe turn humidity up a little bit and let VPD climb up a little bit just to like hold humidity and slow transpiration down a little to give me a little more buffer. But I'm gonna have to see how it plays. I don't know. I mean, that might work against me too. So those are my thoughts at the moment. But I'm with you.
increase the vigor. All of a sudden you get plants going gangbusters.
That
Um,
blow up.
the problem with some of that, like water and stuff, like even the idea of watering heavy, you are essentially shifting that microbiology in a way, and in a negative way possibly, and even to the point of like drying it out, you're definitely impacting what was happening as far as life going on in the media. So that's the downside. Like, and I don't know, man, it's been a tough battle for me when I started trying to really focus on that and try to run to where I'm not going to water too much and I'm not going to, I'm not going to do it too soon and let them. But you really run a fine line between where they're going to fucking wilt on you real quick or not.
Well, that's the thing, like trying to mimic Mother Nature. We're trying to do this in a pot, and it's difficult. Pot sizes, we've talked about, make a difference on how much moisture are staying within the pot, the plant, the root zone. If I water heavy, to me, it's like I'm mimicking the rain and a good rainfall that you might get an inch an hour. If a couple days later, I'm hoping I still have some moisture left that by my third day, fourth day, they're ready to be watered, but I don't quite have to water them. And that's kind of that balance of, people say, oh, you're overwatering. No, there's a balance with living soil that you have to keep that's not too dry, but not too wet. And it's like that fine balance of, plastic pots, you have so many days. Fabric pots, sometimes the air will dry them out a little faster than the plastic. So it's hard learning some of this, especially environments like right now. We have a big weather system coming through. The moisture's up through the fucking roof right now for us. Like we're having high relative humidity spikes. We don't normally have this. So now my plants aren't really taking up the much water as normal because we have so much already in the air. And so it makes a difference on my watering again.
Yeah, I'm going through something similar here. We're getting a lot of humidity and wet weather, and for me, like I'm trying to keep my airflow up. I've got tremendous transpiration going on, like with the tomatoes and all of those plants have blown up into like a heavy vegetative state now. Humidifier is not coming on at all. I'm cranking humidity out. I'm at full airflow all the time and like barely holding 70%, right? Unless I open the door. And then doing that, I'm still running the heat and I'm running like the bathroom fan just to pull air through the apartment, just to be sucking that humidity out and away somewhere. Otherwise, I come home and the apartment's at 70% humidity. I'm just like doors are sticking and like whoa. So yeah, it gets tricky. You actually have to manage the environment outside the controlled environment too sometimes, and that can even be the bigger challenge.
Yeah, this time of year, mine are always running pretty much, the dehumidifiers. But then on the opposite end, it'll be a little drier in the summer too. But definitely affects the biology, I think, and all of that. So like one of the things we had kind of kicked around talking was maybe like soil life succession and the thought of like building like biology that's gonna take longer to grow, right? Like so when I'm drying that pot out and things are going into a dormant state or dying out, like a lot of, I guess my understanding of it is a lot of the higher levels of life tend to die out. They're not going to be as much of a cyst type form or a life type form. So like dry outs like that can really knock that biological succession backwards as well. And so an approach I would have to take would be to try to reintroduce that biology in some form or fashion. And that's something I've been really trying to work on is getting a compost extract to kind of come back with in this scenario. But it's been that mindset of like what's really affecting that biology and how am I able to grow that in a good way to where, yeah, I mean, you might even see fruiting body mushrooms and different things going on.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. I heard, I know MedFit shared that the latest Kiss Organics podcast with Bryant Mason. They talked a lot about that, the biology aspect of it, especially the second part of that, I believe it was the most recent one. And like something occurred to me, even like as I'm that, like, boy, I wonder if it would even make sense to take like socks or like cloth tubes and make little bridges between planters so that you could like carry your biology, keep that pipeline open. And then John Kempf, I think it was talking on his podcast recently. They were talking about that mycorrhizal fungi actually acting like little liquid tubes, and they talked about how we've heard this before from like Paul Stamets about how the nutrients transfer nearly instantaneously at the behest of fungi in the plant. But like there's a new level of science they've unlocked with that, and I think it was John Kempf they were talking about it, that it just flows so fast. And of course, I'm getting us way off in the grass again. But I don't know. My point was something along the lines of what you were saying, but I forget what it was. Yeah.
So here's kind of the interesting thing that we've maybe talked about or discussed before is when we have drought-like conditions, not all the biology are dying off or dying back. Most of them go into a animated type of suspension where they don't really die. They wait for more water to come into the system and they get rehydrated, reanimated, which is kind of interesting. that we can look at it like that. But if you look at like the different permafrost that are now unthawing for thousands of years and the biology that lived through that stuff, the deserts that, after you get a little cow manure on it, all of a sudden you start seeing growth or some water come in, you start seeing life happen. It's interesting that, we talk about everything is dying off, but it's really not dying off.
It's just changing. It's changing in a way. That's the point, though, is like that shift that's going to happen throughout a cycle, and the whole idea of like living soil is the ability of that whole microbiology to be able to cycle the nutrients happening. So when it knocks back to just bacteria, then that bacteria are mining nutrients, but there are a lot of that is driven on just mining it to increase their own colony and grow their own. And like the thought of so there's been some discussion on like the whole original concept of like biochar as being, little homes for biology and different things. But it was kind of like brought to light, like, well, bacteria grow like on the surface that they're mining or doing whatever. So if you have this like glass or crystal form of like pure carbon, basically, like there's not much that they can really mine off from that. So there's probably not going to be much anything going on. And it's not like they have to have a place to commute to work and come back home to. It doesn't, I don't think they really commute necessarily in that sense, but yeah, that was kind of my two thoughts on it.
Your point about the soil structure is valid, though. That's one thing I was going to say before, was about how the soil, like the difference between the soils we're working with in mixed soils, like we're making soils with peat moss mixes or whatever we're base mixing with, or cocoa, right? Versus like a native soil, we're actually building that soil aggregate and the glomalin, and then those biological communities can hide out in those little soil profiles on a microscopic scale, on microscopic amounts of water, where that soil would appear very dry to us, and yet those microbes are alive in that soil profile, on a microscopic scale. And then there's your point here, the overall overscoping thing here is the point is valid about environment dictates gene expression, right? So those microbes can go dormant when the environment isn't friendly, and when it becomes friendly again, they come back out and they express themselves. And actually, John was just talking today, John Kempf was talking on Advancing Agriculture on 102 episode, or maybe it was on another place, but they were talking about how I think it was Phytophthora, depending on the state in the field. The population is the same in the field, but the environmental state of the field is what changes whether the Phytophthora plugs into the plant and drains it of energy, or whether it's defended by the plant. Really wild that like it's just really that simple.
So then what is like water holding capacity? I mean, isn't that kind of what we're discussing here, is what is the ability of our soil to hold moisture and water before it becomes too saturated or too dry?
Yeah, and that like the peat-based medias that we're talking about using are pretty high in organic matter, and that's the other difference of like having an outdoor soil too, like a native soil with rain or whatever. Those do have the different aggregates going on, and a lot of times that is a better, I guess, mix or water holding capability than like having too heavy of a organic matter can hold a lot of water, basically. So
they were just talking about that too. They were talking about the one guy, actually it was, I think, his episode 101. The guy was interviewing John Kempf on the ep8 podcast, and he was talking about his fields where they could actually go through there and with a tractor for harvest when those fields are fully saturated wet, because of the soil structure they built. The structure of the field stays, and now instead of like sinking into ruts, the tractor goes over the structure and it just kind of presses through and presses back up. So it's interesting how much structure you can build if you're really using the tools of regenerative ag or living soils and those components correctly.
So is it biomass that we're seeking then to put in there to help with this? Or is it more like adding carbon sources for carbon I can't even say it right now.
My understanding of the model is it's carbon sequestration in the form of biomass from living plants, and something about the way they do that seems to set that in the soil in a structure that builds like, I think what it does is build that fungal network, and that fungal network must have some sort of a crystalline structure to it where it can kind of support weight without compressing and becoming compacted, right? It has some resistance to compaction, I guess would be the way to describe it.
What is the,
But,
trying to think go ahead.
but let me go on a little more, because I know in a podcast where John talked about humates and humans, it was a whole podcast specifically on humates and humans, and he talked about how the humates and humans that we use on different levels, like they carve off the peat moss first, right? That's the top level, and then they get to leonardite, and then and on down the layers, right? And then they extract those. And there's two different ways to extract those. One is using a very high alkaline, and so you're not getting the same constituents. And then there's a way to do it without using the alkaline. It's a longer process. But at the end of the day, those humates and humans and carbons built into soils help those soils hold water on a much greater scale. And they were talking about the percentage from like 1% to 2% increase the water holding capacity by like 1,000% or something like that.
So look at Gabe Brown.
13,000 gallons in an acre for 1% organic matter. So.
Gabe Brown and the amount of biomass that he's putting back into with the cover crops. That he's got so much biomass built up in just the year, 10 years or so he's been there, less than that. That pretty much the soil can take a 30-inch rainfall and not be saturated.
Yeah.
Not be saturated. Like people would say, oh, that's going to be overwatered and you can wring it. It's not even saturated. That it has so much oxygen getting pulled down in from that now because the aeration of the layers that it continues to build year after year.
And I think he was saying up to like 6 inches an hour, it would still infiltrate and not puddle on top. No pooling.
That's insane, man. It's crazy on a field scale.
But that's the thing. Like we look at it as a much smaller scale, but when you take it into that larger picture, when he's building that much biomass through the rolling and crimping of the cover crops, letting cattle go in there and graze and knock some of it down and shit, leaving manure behind. He's built up so much carbon biomass that soil now that could not take an inch rainfall can now take up to 6 inch to 8 inch per hour, up to 30 inches of rainfall and not be flooded.
And let's just stop and talk about that a sec, because like what we're talking about here is like if you think about the Midwest, the prairie land out there, and all that degraded soil that's out there now. Do you know what that was before we destroyed it with plowing and disking and improper practices? Do you know that was 8 feet of deep organic matter from prairie grasslands that were being grazed occasionally by bison and cattle roaming? Like that's the system. And look at 8 feet of top built up, and we killed it in 40 years disking.
So think about the prairies used to also catch fire. So the potash biochar has all left behind in this naturally occurring, event. And so that's when you look at why biochar is becoming important with retaining water moisture. It's part of the ecosystem that Mother Nature, the God, creation, whatever you want to call it, designed to happen.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but you got a point there that would be where biochar would be fit in the natural system. I still don't understand entirely its role or how it functions, but I do recognize that I've seen a lot of people report tremendous gains in growth when they use it. So I don't know what to attribute that to, but I feel like it's a combination of maybe the carbon and maybe a way for biology to hide out in those periods where it's not friendly out in the soil. And sometimes I know John talks about having to re-inoculate soils quite frequently. Not, your soil, your stuff doesn't always stick or hold, especially if like you have a crop that it's paired with and then you harvest that crop out and you plant a new crop in. If it's a mycorrhizal fungi that has to be paired with a plant and there's no plant to be paired with in that period, it has nothing to pair with. It has to either go dormant and then pick back up, or so
Well,
the complex equation you consider in the
so when you have a fire, as an example, forest fire, wildfire, the plant succession starts over. Biology in the soil starts over, or does it? Why is it certain pine trees, pine cones will not release their seeds unless there's a fire to activate the seeds to then become germinated and sprout? So there's some interesting things to do. Fire really kill full biology? Or are endophytes strong enough to get through fires to help seeds start over again?
Well, then also like you think about a forest fire affecting an area, you think about the burnout it does, it's killing top stuff, but like you go down in the soil 25 feet, you got tree roots down there. If there's endophytic fungi connected to those tree roots, so they're still existing in that soil there. Maybe they can repair from that, or maybe they stay dormant on that root. I mean, maybe that root is a food source for 100 years too. Who knows?
But the other is potash. How much potash comes from ash, burnt material? A lot. And so look how much available potash we are releasing from forest fires or wildfires. How much nutrients are available. But look how long, like, because I live in Colorado, and so we have a lot of wildfires, these burn scars, how long it takes them to really regenerate and start growing again. It takes a long time. Life has to get, like, plant sequestration or plant succession has to start all over again.
Well, the fire itself's burning away a lot of the nutrient too. There's only certain things left behind, right?
And it even activates some of the seeds, actually. It's part of the seed activation process, even.
Yeah. But the medias we're dealing with are like 30% organic matter, where like even like Gabe Brown's is still like I think around 10 or whatever, like in the teens. Yeah. So there's a lot more to that as far as like how long that soil media can hold the water and what that's going to do to the biology. Because I've personally like running the earth boxes. I've ran them for a number of years now, and like I've watched them crash before to where like you get that, dare I say, the microbial collapse. But I mean, I've literally witnessed the plant just shut down because I fucked something up in the soil, so I know there's a definite connection in that, how well the soil microbial is functioning to how healthy and vibrant the plant is looking.
It's funny you say that, because they were talking about that too, and they were saying like, more and more as time goes on, it really seems more and more like we're feeding the soil microbes more and the plants less. And the more we can get good at feeding the soil microbes, the rest of it just runs.
That's the hard part with like having to do top dressings and reamends, is like that idea that you're adding a bunch of shit. It takes it a minute to really kind of get rolling or get digestion. But if you do have a good, I've had it where I have had a good mulch layer and a good thing going on the soil surface and a lot of activity, and yeah, you lay a top dressing down and don't take it long, man, that shit's gone. there's other times where you can put it down and it's there forever. Like it's crazy.
I had that in tomatoes the one year. I put like inoculants and like Sea Shield Rejuvenate down the fall before, heavy mulched, then put tomatoes in that patch next year. And I started mulching, thinking, oh yeah, I'll have this mulch for like the next couple months. And like every 2 weeks, it's going through 6, 8 inches of dense like grass mulch, like fibrous stuff. It's just chewing through it. It's back to nothing. Soil again. I'm like, I can't keep up.
Yeah.
Quick smoke break for all of you out there.
I know, right? I just when I was it was 20 counts.
Cheers, everybody. Taking a quick bong rip.
Cheers, all.
Yeah, my keyboard's still messed up, so cheers the chat. See you guys hanging out. Well, I can watch it. I can type it on my phone, I guess, but appreciate
it.
I find I get too distracted by chat, so I'll glance over at it, reference it, but I try not to get too involved. I just get too much into it.
I at least try to say hi to everybody that comes in. There's always new people joining chat. When somebody says hello, it makes you feel good sometimes.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I try to be friendly. I just don't always follow through as well as I'd like to.
So, what else about soil moisture holding capacity? Like, what are some of the things that we're using to help besides like compost, like woody, mulchy products?
those
Are you using?
Those are all going to increase it, the water holding.
What about like lava rock and the porosity of the stone itself? Like, how do you guys feel about using stuff like that to help retain more moisture in your soil?
Porosity is great.
Yes.
I also like to take advantage of volume to fit the plant size you're working with. I find that's a huge factor. If you put a plant in too small of a soil space, you run out of moisture too fast, you dry out too quick, you won't catch it necessarily. And also, as you get toward flower, you tend to go through nutrients a little faster than you want to sometimes. So, nice to have a little extra soil as a buffer, I find.
But what about your horizontal layer? I mean, you're putting rocks down in there, right? So would you rather have more like a granite type rock or a lava rock that's going to help hold some of that water when you're looking for it?
I like a little bit of granite and I like a little bit of basalt, just about anything I do. I like the trace minerals in those, especially the basalt, like the paramagnetic effect of that. And then anything from a lava perspective is going to have crystalline structures in it, and crystalline structures are always going to help you from an energetic perspective, not to mention a trace mineral nutrition perspective. That's my 2 cents on it.
So what about like people talk about grow stone? Have you guys ever? Yeah, it's a grow medium.
I have used that in the past. I didn't have fantastic success with it, but I didn't try mixing it with soils very much. And I'd like to go back and explore that because I've heard people say good things about it. How about you?
I made like two or 4 yards of soil with it. I forget when they ran out, but they yeah, that was the first thing I used as far as an aeration when I was mixing the soil. It was basically recycled, cleaned and recycled glass, so it didn't really do anything but take up space and and help. So that like the idea that like aeration kind of gives almost a false impression of what it's doing, but it is basically taking up space, so there's less less water holding capacity in the hole. You know what I mean?
I think what you'd be better doing, I mean, like, this is a theory and not tested, okay? Let's just be clear about it. I think what you'd be better doing if you really want soil aggregation, even in a planter, is fostering a good worm community and feeding that worm community and building real soil aggregates with real glomalin in it even if you do it on a small scale in a container, I think that's probably going to be more beneficial for water holding capacity, calcium, nutrients, biology, all those pieces we want to foster to make a living soil really healthy and happy. I mean, there's a reason when we add worm castings, if they're good worm castings, we get a tremendous result. It's better if we can get the worm community in there and keep it in there, I think. I'm trying to do that in some of my soils now, but I'm not up and spinning and running yet. And I'm also still trying to get my soils balanced better. I like where I'm at a base, but I feel like there's more work to do.
So using worms, do you feel that because of the holes that they create, it's helping get watered down, but is it drying them out sooner?
I don't.
Or is it like, the glues that they use? Is the glues around the worms really helping keep that moisture in those tubes?
I think those glues are a big part. That I know there's a glomalin forming factor in there. I think those glues are a big part of what holds water, soil moisture. I think that that's also part of why John Kemp was in one of his talks. He talked about how the digestive tract of the worm is sort of like the cross between that of a chicken and a cow. And if you look at the regenerative ag system on a bigger scale, really the system is like you're growing plants to build soil energy, then you're harvesting or grazing, preferably you'd harvest. Then you'd run a graze of cattle through. Behind the cattle, you'd run your poultry, okay? And then you'd come back around and you do your planting again. Well, so if you got the cross between that of a chicken and a worm in the form of biology in your soil, are we as close to mimicking that as we can without having to run cattle and chickens over it on a small scale? I think probably. It's a theory from with everything I know so far about regenerative ag and soils, and the model is always getting updated. But that's
my experience too is I was kind of thinking in my mind that I was inoculated, and I inoculated with a shit ton of worms, and I had this whole row of these pots, right? In my mind, I had worms in there, so I should have been good on my quote unquote aeration of that media. But my experience that played out did not fall along that line. And I still ran into compaction issues and other issues of the media not wanting to take the moisture well. I mean, they basically turned into hockey pucks. And yeah, and the worms I'm sure died out. I don't know. I didn't necessarily tear them all down, but that was my experience with it. So that line of thinking that the worms are going to serve as an aeration source, I would say from my experience, that didn't pan out like I would have thought or like people would have talked about. So I wouldn't necessarily put my, eggs in that basket, so to speak, as being the aeration. I would still try to get something.
So let's talk about this, because you mentioned compaction, and a lot of growers deal with it and not realize that they're dealing with compaction issues. So what are some of the telltale signs that you can tell that you're getting compaction in your soil and your plants aren't getting as vigorous and growing, or the roots aren't penetrating through it like they should be?
Okay, one obvious sign right off is like settling. If you see soil that, if you're in a planter and it was 12 inches when you started and now it's 6 inches high, you're compacting a lot. You've lost 6 inches of soil depth in compaction, basically, or either that or you've digested that organic matter. But either way, you need to get that fluff back in there. So that's one. And that's like that hockey puck thing you're talking about, right? I've tried worm stuff integrated in soil mixes before, and I ran into troubles with them too, trying to maintain that moisture balance again that we're back to we were talking about before. That was always the trouble for me, even with worm bins. And I got another experiment cooking right now, and I haven't checked it in like a month because I'm nervous that I'm going to be wrong again.
So my question is then, what is causing the compaction? Is it things breaking down over time, or the perlite working their way up, so everything's settling down and kind of compacting? when we water in hard, some of the watering is compacting. Like, what are some of the symptoms that
I
are
think
causing this?
I think it's all of those combined. I think it's the watering. I think like you say, the perlite, like perlite's in my mix right now. That definitely floats to the top. You do that, you get soil digestion, you get settling because every time you water, you're compressing that soil profile, right? That's how we settle soils in general, right? You compound all those things together, and I think what you have is a synergistic stack for compaction. And then if you take that and you compare it to like an outside soil where there's worms and animals and all kinds of other interactions, right? There's actual natural interactions affecting that. And that soil also has a full geologic profile under it. And where we are in a planter here, we don't have that. We have no geologic profile. All we have is topsoil effectively. So we're working with no horizons really. No matter what we try to mimic horizon wise, I don't think we do anywhere near of a good job of trying to mimic that in a controlled environment like we're doing.
So out in nature, you have a couple different things that cause it. Rain is one of them. Rain actually causes compaction. If there is bare soil, the impact of one raindrop will cause compaction. Take that times 1,000 or however long that rain is raining for. If the ground is bare, it's going to cause compaction issues. The other is heavily grazing animals, walking continuously in the same path over and over the same area. Dogs, for example. Deer, another example. If you walk in the woods, you start seeing trails of animals following the same paths, and they've started compacting those paths over time, which is killing the vegetation growth from growing in those areas.
I mean,
Dogs do the
I
same
don't
thing.
think it was deer that were walking on my pots across the bag.
But it's some of the watering issue. It's the way we water and how hard the water is actually hitting the top of the soil. And
What I had experienced was the peat moss that I used was a sphagnum peat moss, Coots recommendation, and that is more of a bigger fiber from like what I've seen of like a Pro Mix or other forms of peat moss. So that being said, there's like a lot more like bigger chunks of stuff and like actual sticks and stuff.
more structure.
And what I had experienced is that as that all broke down, it was breaking down into like a silt or a form of silt, and those interlaid over time. And it did do what you were talking. It shrank in the pot. It literally, the volume shrank in the pot. The plants were experiencing like really, it was really hard to get them watered is what I was always experiencing. So one day they'd be happy, the next day were like wilty, like when the pot would still feel heavy, and it was like, and even if I did get them watered, they weren't like where I got the pot, the media saturated, they weren't happy with that, you know what I mean? So it was kind of this weird balance for that watering all the time. And the fact that I could dig into it and feel the actual density of it to where it was, physically kind of hard to dig into. But to me, that was what I experienced in the media was the over time, it took about 3-4 cycles to where that started to really become a problem. And looking back on it, some of it might have been that I just was never adding enough. Like I water in some gypsum sources and I add calcium along the way. Like that back then, I wasn't necessarily doing that. And I do recall using a magnesium source as well, which would cause a tightening in that soil. So there was a lot going on in my case. And there was a lot of examples you guys gave for compaction, but that's what I actually saw is that peat-based that fiber. And I think you'll see it in cocoa too. The cocoa has a fiber to it. You can actually peel it apart and see. And
it just breaks down so quickly.
Well, yeah, and as the biology, everything's breaking that down, it's becoming smaller bits and smaller bits. And those smaller bits start getting compaction.
Smiley, man, that was exact perfect description of what I've observed as well over the years in trying to like recycle and reuse soils. And I think I had the same issue, man. I was not re-amending correctly. I wasn't putting calcium back in. I didn't understand quite that balance. I knew compost is good, but I didn't realize just really quite how that spectral part of nutrition works, where like calcium and potassium are huge drivers in this. Like people talk about NPK, but man, calcium and potassium are really major components, and those two have to balance before anything else really will play ball, you know? So yeah, and those are huge drivers in potassium. Like we look at gypsum in clay soils. Gypsum's a great way to break up tight clay soils. A huge part of that is because of its chemical interaction with the magnesium in those clay soils. And that's what helps flocculate those soils initially. And then that lets the biology get into those soils. And then the biology can start really breaking out those clay colloids and unlock all those nutrients that are locked up on those clay colloids. So that was just a great uh, overview and description of everything I've observed and experienced as well.
So, Smiley, you're saying it's over several cycles that you're starting to see this. Are you re-amending with different like things for aeration, growstone, perlite, anything, vermiculite? Are you putting anything back in to help that when you're?
So that was the first round of soil that I had mixed, and yeah, after a few cycles, I ended up remaking a new batch of soil on a different platform, I guess. And then I just replaced them, and I was going to a bigger size pot as well. So I had made a whole new batch just to get something going. And then the next batch, the change or adjustment that I made is I brought in a lot more sand. And then the grow stones weren't available. And then like the next batch I made, it was like I had found a source for pumice stone, because I'm totally against perlite. I don't want to run perlite or whatever. And then the pumice stone, I had a source, and then that kind of disappeared. And then so yeah, so I ended up in the last few batches of soil I had mixed was running like a pea gravel and sand, and that was kind of the base of that. And I would say it was more, yeah, I guess it was still around the 30%. I was, you could probably go a little higher with it, but
Do you find that
it makes it really heavy media though. That's the thing. The sand and all that like makes it a really heavy media. So now all of a sudden, you're dragging a lot of weight around if you got to move the pots or whatever. So there are some downsides to trying to do things without. There's reasons people use perlite, I guess, but yeah, I don't know.
So is it retaining more moisture using some of the sand? Because if you go to like a beach or area, you dig down and sand really kind of retains water or moisture in it.
I didn't think of the sand as retaining moisture, I guess, but yeah, I don't know. I've always kind of wondered about that as well. I know there's there's like water kind of moves through sand really different than other aggregates, I guess. So but it moves through faster in the demonstrations I was watching, like the one I'm thinking of, the guy had set up like a sandy loam soil sample, something in the middle that's just a loam, and something more clay heavy. But the sandier one, the water dispersed a lot more evenly, and it moved through a lot quicker, and it had a lot deeper penetration. So to me, it was making it able to spread through that media better. So
let's talk about actually. Let's just stop in that a sec. I don't know what kind of sand you're adding, but sand in a commercial greenhouse setting is one of the primary tools used for propagating plants that doesn't foster disease and disease problems? There's a few reasons for that. One, it drains really well, and two, it actually does retain moisture really well. Like Medically Fit was talking about there, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about using sand from that perspective for the exact reasons you talked about before, Smiley. When I've used sand and even clay, I've tried putting like a light layer of my native clay in the bottom, knowing those clay colloids are loaded with stuff, and that when they get unlocked, they're awesome. But the weight again, man, those planters get so damn heavy like that. So that makes me think maybe a light amount of sand would be beneficial, because they use it for cuttings for like figs and hardwood cuttings and stuff. Man, you can take a bunch of cuttings and lay them in sand, moisten that sand and just cover it. And like weeks of like holding cuttings without having to wet them really. So maybe that has more water retention capacity than we're recognizing.
It definitely reacts different in water. It seems to me anyway. But in the media, you'll feel a difference. I remember that when mixing it in, it's like you'll almost feel it has a whole different feel to it. Like
Yeah, a bucket of sand versus a bucket of soil. Holy shit, the weight difference.
Dude, it's a lot more drive to mix it. It's like mixing concrete versus mixing like a light, like mixing like a sphagnum peat and moss mix is almost like mixing a grain, right? It's really fluffy and light when it's dry. You try mixing sand and like pebbles or something, man, it's a whole different animal. Like it does not mix easy. So yeah. Were you using like a regular play sand, or were you using like a green sand or something with a trace mineral component?
fucking play sand, dude. It was a buck a bag or whatever.
That green sand is not cheap.
Well, green sands, it's a good source for silica and trace minerals, but you have to be concerned about heavy metal issues with some of the sand. Green sand being one of them. But like any sand, really, to me, if it's like, how do I want to describe it? As fine as that material is, there's got to be more heavy metal contaminants to it than we're understanding. Like the beach sand or sands along the river and shit like that. Like
It's
if
not
green sand,
silver,
yeah,
right? It's not pure
right.
quartz.
Well, the quartz stuff, to my understanding, is kind of like that, where it's, stuff don't really grow on it. Like you were saying, it's a little more of a
Oh, be,
environment for biology because there's nothing to mine there, right? Like we were talking, like they're not gonna grow there because there ain't nothing to mine. It's fucking little quartz crystals.
if it's only little quartz crystals and there's no trace minerals, there would be no enzyme function to mine, and therefore life wouldn't survive on it very well. Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I don't know how true that is or whatever. I'm sure there's some forms of organic matter in any soil, beach or whatever. So there's gonna be life, but in a basic, my thought on it is it's little quartz crystals, like you know what I mean. It's
But
gonna cause the aeration and maybe an energetic effect and some.
oh yeah, there's the energetic effect, and then there's also again you're back to that spectral. Like if there's like 1 part per trillion, right, on a beach of sand in trace mineral nutrition, there's not enough to make that spectral component to support whatever life, whether it's fungi or bacteria or plants or humans or animals or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, and
interesting thoughts.
like some of the sands, the length of time that they actually will be broken down, like such as green sand, is about 15 months. So when you're trying to use some of these sands, understand that how long they actually take to break down, thinking that it's a quick remedy, and it's really not. So if you don't understand, maybe look into it, do some research, because it took me a minute to really find out how long green sand took to break down. And that's what the information was I found was about 15 months. So that's a year and 3 months into a year.
I came across
Green sand is so much different than play sand, though. It's like a whole
different animal. Yeah. I actually came across green sand in like 2013 or 2014 or 2015, somewhere in there. I was like, oh, I should add that to my soil mixes because I didn't have a great soil mix at the time. So I added some, and then same thing. I read up on it more, and it was like, oh, that's going to be a while before that shows up.
Isn't green sand like an iron compound too? There's like it's a compound of like iron, silica, and something else.
You know what I was really after out of it was
I've
like,
never really got into using it. I don't know. My wife. Oh wow, I'm not into this now. My wife has hermit crabs, and she actually feeds the green sand to the hermit crabs as part of their diet. Like they fucking eat this shit. So we have some in the house, but I've never really used it in the soil in any form, just because um, haven't. But if it's an iron source, like that's
it's iron, copper, silica. There's a bunch of traces. I think there's like 20.
what's on the back, Matt? You got the box right there. What's on the back of it?
It pretty much just says 100% green sand.
Really?
Blue green silicous mineral,
I thought there was
natural occurring marine sediment deposits. Heavy, it helps loosens heavy clay soils. That's pretty much all it says on this. But this to me is like so fine and of a powder of a dust that it reminds me of like a bentonite clay or like a facial clay that are like mass clay. It's just that fine of a powder, this green sand is. So it's not real granular, but it's pretty fine when it comes to the material.
Yeah, I found it was super fine. The stuff I had too. You wouldn't even try to use it as any kind of aggregate, even a fine one. It was just almost like almost like a bentonite clay, like grade fineness.
That's why when you guys said that, I was like, "What? That ain't that aeration, really?" Like,
No.
I mean, that's why
I'm trying to make that clear. Like, yeah, that's way different than place sand. That's gonna do a whole different thing.
my train of thought was like Smiley's into trace minerals, and like maybe he was like, okay, I got the clincher here, sand for aggregate and a little bit of like trace mineral, and like I think maybe you're onto something. I'm trying to follow.
I mean, the minerals are important. I know I've witnessed that as well. Like, I think I've said it before, but like the iron, the manganese, and the copper were pretty regular on the recommendations I was getting in the day with soil mix. So,
Well,
add those in too, and I would see and witness this like green lush change go on with the plant, like they got something they didn't have. You know what I mean? So it was pretty eye opening as well. So just food for thought on some of it.
well, look at the iron content that green sand has and how iron helps with photosynthesis.
Well, that's what we were trying to look at, but the fucking box don't have it.
So
Hey, blame fucking down to earth for that, not
Right.
listing what's in it.
So the things that I noticed when I put the green sand on after about 3 to 6 months, 3 months I started to notice. By 6 months and on out, I noticed some pretty significant effects. Just lusher, greener, darker, and as they matured, like almost a blue hue, which I've come to really note seems to associate when you get like that nutrient level and that biology really like fired up and acting well together. They almost take on like it becomes more of a blue hue than a green hue. But I've noticed that with the green sand back when I was playing with that, and then more recently, when I did my plant sap analysis on the tomatoes, and I started correcting tomatoes, AEA recommended 4 trace minerals to correct for my soils or for my crop that I was working on: copper, zinc, boron, and manganese. No, boron and iron. And the copper and iron, when I started adding those, the leaf size, the lushness, the greenness, and that deep blue hue came up like exponentially a whole nother level. So I think those, especially the copper and iron, are huge critical components that we don't necessarily give enough credit to, especially like the iron and copper are both like critical in the photosynthetic process, but they're not directly related, but they're both parts of the precursor to it. And actually, so is manganese. Manganese does like the ionization for water or something right before the photosynthetic process. So those components all like support that energetic.
Well,
It
some
splits
of
it splits the water molecule.
Splits the molecule. That's what it is. Yeah.
one of the things that I noticed though, if my plants or soil has lack of iron, my leaves like to be more yellow. Even though I'm pounding it with nitrogen, they still want to be yellow. And that's why I talk about with the photosynthesis part of it. When you actually have enough iron, that green for some reason wants to come back.
Right there. That lemon tree, low iron. Been correcting the iron, it's greening up. Had plenty of nitrogen, wouldn't green up.
And that's some of these people out here, they haven't figured that issue out. Excuse me. My plants, the leaves are yellow, it looks like crap, and they keep pounding it with nitrogen and it's not helping it, and they're not understanding why. Well, where if you're re-amending your soils, because Smiley and I have talked about this before, what are you using to put back for iron source? Because unless you're adding like blood meal, which is a good iron source, green sand, you're not really putting a lot of iron sources back into re-amending your soils. And so that's one of the issues that we as living soil growers will run into is low iron in our soils.
And you got to make sure that iron's in the right chelation too. You put the wrong chelation in, it ain't going to help you. It's going to hurt you. And that plant will take it up, but it won't be able to use it. So it'll show up on a tissue test, but it won't be effective for the plant to use.
Well, the biology plays a big role in that. They release the siderophores, I think it's called. But those are what that actually mines the iron and changes the state, the oxidation state of the iron, and makes it into a usable form from an oxidized form. So it's got to be in the right state too. So that's the big hurdle. But I mean, it comes back to having a highly active soil biology going on to cycle those nutrients too. But even that being said, in a pot, which I wasn't in a bed, I think the volume of the soil might matter too. But yeah, anyway, those were a couple of recommendations that were like shit I wouldn't have seen, I guess, without getting a test. So I mean, it's still probably going to be the best idea to have any kind of a, otherwise you're just shooting in the dark, right? Like to have any kind of target that you're, and people argue about how accurate a test is or a soil test or whatever, but it's like you got something versus fucking nothing, right? Like at least you got something to kind of have an idea. Oh, I got enough potassium. I probably don't have to add anything like that, this round or whatever. Or, maybe it's building up on the magnesium and you didn't know that going on, or whatever the case may be. But there's some weird shit can go on in the soil as far as that standpoint with the nutrients that the smaller the pot size, the more extreme it's going to get, then the bigger the pot size. So it's a thing for indoor growing the living soil, or hydro guys don't have to worry necessarily about it. You can see guys grow big ass fucking plants out of a solo cup or whatever. Like it just don't work that way in the soil, like I've in my experience. But
Two different models of soil nutrition entirely. And oh man, there was something I was going to say. I lost it. Yeah, go ahead. I always lose it.
or
So if what was there, I thought I seen a question in. What are some of the other things that you guys are noticing when it comes to like plant vigor when you water versus how they're drying out? Do you see a difference when your plants are really thirsty versus after they've been watered? Like, are your plants always praying after you water them, or sometimes are they droopy, still kind of like what is it? What
I
is the vigor like?
personally, I notice cycles even throughout the day. I'll see morning, noon, night cycles for sure, and even more fine hair, fine tuned than that. But definitely, I see it. Like I see a plant parking up where it needs water. In fact, I just did a video on this not too long ago with some sweet Thai basil, where it was like that bin was unevenly watered, and I'm looking at it going, it looks. I can't tell if it's wilty or what. It almost looked overwatered, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And I picked the bin up, and it was like it's a little light on one end. I was like, oh, that's that whole like uneven watering thing. We were just talking about that like the week before, right? About water, go back, water again, get it to soak through, right? And I wasn't doing it. And so I was like, all right, well, so I soaked it down and I did a couple different video clips over like the next 12 hours. And you could see them go from like, there's a couple of leaves on each plant that like that part of the root system wasn't getting watered. It was like wilty and a little curly and weird. And by the next morning, they fluffed out, they sat up nice, and they're sitting sweet. So I definitely noticed a huge difference in watering, and I could see it. I can see it visually, and then I'll confirm it by hefting the container to see what kind of actual water weight is in the container.
I've noticed I guess a negative effect if they've dried out, especially to the point if they've dried to where they kind of wilted or whatever. Usually it's detrimental by my experience, and it's sets them back quite a bit. There's a lot of recovery that's got to happen afterward to get them kind of going again. But some of them
But
kind of bounce back, but they're never really the same, I don't think. So, I mean, I've made the mistake. I mean, my last updates, I've had to show some plants that had the effect of it. So it is what it is, but it's like, yeah, they don't. It definitely affects them through the whole life cycle from there on out. So it's a detriment.
I should also qualify my statement when I say I notice visually they're getting wilty. Like as far as watering goes, I notice they're needing water. Like you say, if I let them go to wilty, they take a certain amount of damage, and that hurts their overall health and longevity for sure.
well, it's like the roots
That leaves
actually
and shit.
the roots are drying back enough that it's causing damage to the leaf tip and surface, and so they're not able to transpire and get rid of the moisture because there's no moisture down in the pot to transpire, and
Yeah.
so you get a lot of detriment to the leaf. A lot of them do die back because they've dried up so much. Even though you try to water it, if it's too dry, it's going to take a minute for that water to absorb in the soil again before the roots will allow it to uptake.
Well, it
And
depends on what extent they dried. So at a cellular level, there's actually water aquifers that go all through that, right? As that shit dries out, that cell actually will start to collapse on itself. And depending on how dry that actually got, that could rupture that cell wall. If it does that, that whatever leaf or stem or whatever ain't coming back. It's done, right? They're gonna have to rebuild and do another one. So that's what I've witnessed is it'll actually shed leaves like after coming back from that, and you'll see them. Half of them will come back, so half of them didn't. And that was my my experience with it. But I remember that talk where they had actually the cell ruptures, and at that point it's not necessarily to pop back.
For sure. And the other thing we have to remember in that is if we're seeing leaves and stems wilting back or dying back, the roots that drive those leaves and stems are dying back because that's where they're getting all their power from. So you're taking a root hit, and anytime you take a root hit, you're taking a huge hit to the plant health. Because if we really have our health of our plants correct, about somewhere between 50 and 80% of our plant's total biomass should be in our root system, theoretically. And if that's the case, then we start seeing damage up top. You know, we're possibly looking at 5 times as much damage underground that we don't see. Just maybe that's not correct, but it's a perspective to hold in mind, right?
Do you think there's a difference between a dry back like that in soil or a dry back in pots? Because now when I think about the soil of the plant drying out like that or not being able to find water, I think about that root system really like reaching out, you know what I mean? Almost strengthening itself, you know, in a sense, because it's reaching out looking for water. Then when it gets a hit, you know what I mean? Now that it's got a little bit of bigger of a base, the roots are sticking out a little bit further, you know. So is it taking that big of a hit in, you know what I mean, in the root zone as it is up top?
Okay, well, so now we have to distinguish what we're talking about. If we're talking about in native soil where there's a geologic profile, that's a big difference between that and a plant in a pot. A plant in a pot doesn't have a geologic profile to access. It doesn't have the moisture reserve that's in that geologic profile. Even if the root isn't in that profile, there's the ability for that moisture to transfer in that profile, even without the root touching it. And then in addition to that, in a native soil, plants will put down a much deeper root. In fact, that's one of the things you can access as far as an outdoor cannabis grower goes. Don't damage your taproot before you go put it outside, and make sure you make good space when you dig your spot, your hole where your plant's going in. You let that taproot go all the way down, you'd be amazed how tall that plant will go all the way up, and how big that plant will get, and how much yield you'll actually get out of that plant, out of that species and strain, if you know how to really.
Well, anything out in nature that is the roots are not being restricted by a pot are going to grow much deeper, searching for that water source and water table. They will go 15, 20, 30 foot down searching for water. Our in a pot, we can't do that. And so that's where the drying out really changes the effect of the roots versus, you know, in natural soil or in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I'd love to be able to do in like a grow tent is lay down like a 6-inch clay mat and then put my planters and pots on top of that, and be able to maintain a moisture and biology base that my plants could grow their tap roots down into after I've vegged them. Drop them in, let them grow out, harvest, pull your pot out, you know, have like a soil base there that you can go into. But you need more vertical light every time you add soil layer, right? So
Dude, the roots are fucking crazy. When I was running I had the Blue Mott dripper system. So before I had they have the soaker hose, but I actually had the drippers. They have individual drippers. And what I watched is the plant's roots fucking swallow those. Like they would come up and the pot would be fairly, it was always when the pot was kind of getting dry. So like the bottom would be, or the, you know what I mean, the majority of the pot was dry. Those fucking roots would like totally engulf that dripper, and it would be like plugged up, and then I would have to like cut the roots away, get the thing out, like pull the hose apart, and the roots would be up the hose and into the next fucking dripper, and like growing up the hose to try to get to the water source. Basically, it was like, so yeah, they definitely seek out water. They get nuts after seeking out water. And that was actually one other thing. People always say how whatever roots do in flower, oh, they don't do this or that in flower. They were fucking eating those drippers in flower, and they were growing up. And I started putting the drippers up off the soil so that they couldn't get around them and do that necessarily. And they would build this like fucking mound up underneath. It looked like a big white thumb coming up out of the soil, but it was just all these roots matted up on top where it was dripping, trying to absorb that water right away. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing what they'll do for water. Like,
similar story when I had the tomatoes in the farm, I put drip line down, and man, you put that drip line under the mulch. End of the season, you got to pull that drip line up. That line's that big around, at a point in the season, it doesn't like deflate back down when you stop watering. The reason is because that damn thing's full of root pipelines running through it. Those roots go right in those little drip emitters, and they track that whole thing. You could have pulled up through the season. It's a tube of roots.
Yeah, I don't even remember if that answered your question, Eagle. I'm sorry.
You're muted. Of course you are. You're still muted.
I am still muted.
There you go.
I guess it did answer my question. As far as like roots traveling and seeking shit, you know what I mean? I watched a neat little thing the other day. If you guys like it, I would be happy to pass it on. It was a little thing that said Can Trees Talk, or Talking Trees, I believe was the name of the title there. And basically it went on to talk about, you know, how they clean our air and they're responsible for a good portion of our life and whatnot. But what blew my mind about this thing was they got into the soil and started talking about how they were an essential part of the overall life cycle. Not just to them, they started to, you know, talk about like theory of species and how one, you know, with that mindset, they would be choking out different species of the forest. But in fact, they were talking about, and they work together in the mycology, through the mycology and different types of mycology. And it was interesting to find out how some mycology and different trees will help each other. They had like certain trees, two different species of maples next to each other, and they would do different experiments. They put one in a tent. They had actually in the one experiment, they had a cedar tree and two different species of maple, and then they would surround the one tent and pipe in carbon isotopes, different, you know, that. So they wanted to see if they would travel back and forth to what needed to be, and if, you know, through the soil itself, the mycology, if they would be smart enough or if they would travel over to the cedar. And because different mycology and that same web, whatever, just a little bit different, the cedar wouldn't uptake anything. But the two different species of maple showed clear signs of the isotopes being, you know, in each other. So they were indeed, you know, going, do you need carbon? Okay, yeah, okay. And they were passing it through the root system. So indeed, they're passing nutrients, water, whatever they need through the, you know what I mean, through the root system, which I thought was, we talk about that all the time, but here they had clear evidence in trees that shit be passed from one to the other. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Eagle, take that thought and extend it another level, because Paul Stamets has done some research with that kind of stuff, and they found that fungi conduct nutrients and transmit information, both information and nutrients, and I'm sure a lot more, instantaneously, like long distances through the soil. And so now the evolving theory about this is that the fungi are facilitating that in the soil between the trees and the plants. That those are basically the fiber optic communication network of the soil. And so what happens when we disturb the fungi in the soil? Do we see a plant life depreciation? Pretty much as a general rule, yeah, right? So, you know, maybe that's the internet of the soil.
But not all plants tap into the same fungi.
And don't all different humans connect to different types of networks based on their
Ecto and Michael, right? They do different types of
endo, ecto.
Yes.
I can't even talk tonight. Arbsculary, yes.
Microbial fungi.
Muscular.
Arbscular.
Muscular.
Right in the bustle.
That's the VAM. It's the vascular, bruscular, mycorrhizal.
That was another thing they were saying too that I thought was kind of funny, that they found the ecto and whatnot in between the plant fibers and it was, communicating to down below, basically, is what they were saying. It was talking. If what the mycos in the plant was talking to the mycos in the soil, like, hit me up with this is what I need. You know what I mean? As it tied into something else you guys kind of talking about a little bit tonight is like moisture a little bit. And what it was saying, why the symbiosis all worked was to keep, in fact, that network that you guys are talking about alive. So they were working in symbiosis just to keep basically a canopy over top of the soil, basically. So there was no sunspots directly penetrating and drying out the soil and killing off the network, the whole fucking thing. So to keep this whole thing going, they were working together, passing nutrients, passing water to keep that canopy going, protecting the whole fucking network. Which I was like,
Well, and that's the thing, like they share moisture, they share water between different species of plants. If one plant needs moisture, it will share it through the root zone and allow other plants to kind of absorb the moisture that they need. And that's what's that?
Go ahead.
You know, that's what's interesting to me is like, if this plant, like 100 feet away needs a little bit more moisture, it can communicate to say, hey, I need a little bit of moisture over here, a little bit of water, send some water, and this plant has a little bit of extra, it will send it to it.
So we can go back to a really simple concept here, because we really try to drill into the principles and practices that support all this. Study and mimic nature. What do we see in nature? Communities organizing and working together, all contributing, all sharing resources, building symbiotic relationships, and they build complex, structured, integrated systems from it every single time. Organized systems. They work together. And if you destroy one part of the system, you take down all the other pieces of the system, and that destroys other pieces of the system. And if you build those pieces back up, you build them back up. So if we study and mimic nature as our principle, then all this other shit that we're talking about really makes a lot of sense and falls into place. And as we talk about specifics, those pieces should make a lot more sense. So I just want to really drill that point home that, that study and mimic, man, like we talk about all this stuff, but, I pay an awful lot of attention these days to just what's going on around me in the natural environment. When I come home from work, I wash my hands, I take off my work shirt, I put on my clean grow room shirt, I walk in my grow room, and I sit down for about 15 minutes, and I just observe. And god damn if I don't notice something new that I've never noticed before every time.
this is part of the easiness of like the beds. I heard again, you guys, when we've talked about this a lot, the struggle between smaller pots or pots versus bed, which is easier there. So is that part of what makes the bed system easier? Is this whole system of exchange,
Well,
keeping your, even, the nutrient systems in one plant's not sucking up and, depriving one area, it's kind of equally being passed throughout, and moisture, throughout with the mycology system. Is that what helps make this whole soil organics thing more easy versus the one plant, one pot?
well, Eagle, if you go back and look at like one of my videos from my no-till bed, I only use 3 gallons of water when I would water that no-till bed. That was a 5x4 by 18-inch deep bed. 3 gallons of water twice a week is all that bed ever took. And look at the plants that produced out of it. I mean, most people are watering more than 3 gallons or at least a gallon per pot. And for that size of bed, the small amount of water being used is what I was trying to show is how plants really help retain and keep moisture in there. and they'll share it. And like, you don't need as much water to maintain this healthy ecosystem as a monoculture in a single pot that, you know, is drying out because there's nothing to help protect the surface, the air, its evaporation rates.
That's one thing I will say. Your point is valid about how well plants retain, you know, or how their resilience to drought, right? I have some videos on my old farm after I abandoned it, and we had, was it 21, I think, or 22, I think we had a wicked drought here. And like the plots where I had grown, hadn't touched them in 2 years, deep green, everything around them brown, dead, right? So that point is valid, but I think we also should consider that perspective that you were talking about, that large bed you had. There's a huge difference in evaporative surface area per volume area comparatively between those two. And that's something that we talk about in greenhouse environments as well. A greenhouse that's a quarter the size of another greenhouse will take way more energy than a quarter of the energy to heat it. It'll take like half as much energy as the large greenhouse because of that conglomeration of surface area versus total volume space. Just something to keep in perspective in this conversation.
Is that something that LEDs are helping along with us? Besides the draw, you know what I mean? They're more direct to the plant. We can control exactly, you know, the area, not no more, no less. We're not, you know, lighting. It's, you know, lighting a whole room, but the intensity is, you know, straight down to the plant. So is that something that, you know, is a key factor here as well as, you know, the light that we use as well?
Dude, I gotta say, you guys know I was running HIDs up until this fall, and I've switched to LEDs, Metagrow LEDs, X's and Y's. And oh my God, dude, I never saw growth like this before. I never saw growth like this before. There's a massive, massive, massive difference. I have to readjust my vegetative times, my heights, my everything is reset. It's a massive difference. I mean, I can't even describe it. Yeah, and it's going to adjust because of that. You're going to accelerate your photosynthesis dramatically, and you're going to burn through nutrients faster, and you're going to need a different balance of nutrients. Probably it's probably, you know. And I'm running the spectral enhancement too. I'm running the ultraviolet and the infrared. Right now, I'm running those full time. I do have the full spectral controller. I plan to implement that at some point, but programming that has been problematic, and I'm not sure I have a fully working unit. But I would say, yeah, lighting is a huge factor, and that is my 2 cents on it.
I heard you guys talking about like different phases of the plant there, you know, and you kind of referring, it seemed like more to more nutrients and water there, but you know, can some of them factors be misjudged, if you will, from you or anybody else from the intensity of that light and the point where you're looking at it? Because like you said, it does go through different phases of the, you know, throughout the day. But if you, me and Smiley talked about this a long time ago, light intensity, would you rather bang it out in 4 hours or you want it to jog through the day? So if you're banging it out with a, you know, a high intensity light super, you know what I mean, that plant to me is going to go through its cycle. So everything you see that you guys talked about, it's going to go bang, 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 bang a lot quicker. So if you come into it and your light's on, we're getting more into like a DLI thing here. But if you come in a little bit later in the day here and your plant's already dropped and it's asleep because it's already got its fill, you know what I mean? Now you're looking at the plant going, does it need water? Because you've come in and it's already done for the day. So you know what I mean? Can light factor throw off your overall diagnosis of the plant, you know?
I think I would say I think it could. I wouldn't say I'm experienced enough with LEDs yet to even have a fucking great answer for that. But I would say this. I always, when I look at a plant from its watering diagnosis perspective, I'm always confirming that with other things, right? I'm sticking my finger in the soil. What's the soil moisture feel like? I'm hefting the planter. Is it heavy? Is it heavy or light? It's really light. Okay, well that backs up. It looks like it needs water, right? Like definitely I don't do it all on one thing. I as many factors that I can base a decision on, I do. And I'm gonna
Yeah,
be
ego light intensity, I would think does definitely matter. And like, so that's like the idea of covering the soil for the biology. It's going to matter in that respect, even with HID or LED lighting. But the thing I had found is like you can really bombard the plants with a lot of photons, right? But they do at a certain point kind of shut down as far as that goes. But there is, a response where they can develop like more dense chlorophyll. So like when they're exposed to that and they start to grow and get used to that, they can get a more dense type of chlorophyll that'll actually be a different like leaf, so to speak, than what it would be. But the chlorophyll can change how it's laid out in that leaf, and it can be more dense to where it can absorb more of those photons to where it's not. But if you exceed that, it's been my experience, they fucking shut down and they start eating themselves kind of thing.
Well, let's keep in mind too, like when our pots dry up, the stomata on our plants close up. So there's not so much transpiration happening. This slows down photosynthesis rates.
Stops photosynthesis.
So this is why we talk about in living soil, keeping that balance where we're not becoming too dry in our pots.
Yeah. And like what Eagle is kind of getting out of the DLI or the daily lighting integral, like how many photons came about in that day. So if say it's 4 hours or 8 hours, if you're shining the same amount of photons in 4 hours, or you're spreading that amount of photons over the 8 hours by dialing it back, but the duration is longer, And I think, there's an limit to it in my mind to where the plant's going to exceed what it can actually take in because photosynthesis is a reaction. There's a time involved in that reaction. So, the rate that it can convert a photon into energy in an efficient manner requires a chain of reactions to happen. So there, it might be instantaneous, it might be whatever, but at a really fast rate, that can get overwhelmed in a sense. You know what I mean? It can only process so much.
Well, and it needs to be able to exchange all the nutrients and components that drive all those processes in the photosynthetic cycle, the Krebs cycle, all those other pieces that drive around that have to be able to feed and exchange out, right? Like it has to be able to get those sugars back out, feed the root system, feed the plant.
The water is part of that photosynthesis cycle. So that's definitely a needed process of being able to bring up water in the plant and being able to split that to do the photosynthetic process, and then being able to expel that oxygen water vapor out of the stomata and exchange the CO2 that it needs for the next reaction to happen.
That's part of why
kind of a trip, but that's like all happening. It's amazing, really.
And that's part of why that VPD thing we talk about so frequently is so important, because you can limit that either way by either being too dry and closing stomata, now it can't transpire, or by being too moist and now there's not enough moisture difference between the plant and the air, and it can't distribute moisture out into the air, and it can't transpire. It's like you can't breathe. If you can't breathe, you sure as hell ain't going for a run, right? He said with a cigarette in his mouth.
But here's what, so
Vapor.
if that's the case, look at the rainforest. How are they so dense and populated with all this plant?
Well, they're able to exchange the vapor. That's why I say it's a little bit different than when
Also, let's not forget again that John Kemp talks about this a lot. Actually, that role of gas exchange in the soil for microbes, and how there's fungi in there making CO2. There's fungi in there. There's all kinds of stuff going on, right? There's oxygen being produced. There's carbon dioxide being produced. So not only in the soil, but the soil exchanges with the air as well. If you have good aggregate soil, there's constant airflow through the soil and through the air. And so that gas exchange extends both down into the soil aggregate and up into the air around those plants. And all you need is a little bit of sunlight, say. Now you've got a convective current going, right? Now you're drawing air in from the air around you. There's a lot of interesting interactions. You start studying those microclimates and those climatic interactions. That's part of why we have to run fans in our tents to drive airflow. It's because we don't have sunlight striking it and giving that nice convective airflow that draws those air currents and causes wind gusts and wind shifts.
Shit, our tents should be a perfect example. What we do indoors should be a perfect example of what little light actually plants can actually survive on. We're not putting anything close to what direct sunlight is. We're more like shade, damn near. You know what I mean?
Direct sunlight is 1,000 watts per meter squared. 1,000 watts per meter squared.
now I get it, but also that's a balanced spectrum. You know what I mean? That's the spectrum the plants are looking for, I should say. So, and there's a lot more to sunlight than there is in just an LED, regardless of how good they're trying to get the coverage of the spectrum. It's just not the same spectrum. That's where I think the big difference comes in. You're
Well-
dropping because each one of those things is driving a different process in the plant too, and that's kind of a, I guess I don't know enough about it to give word for word, but like anthocyanins and the different purples, those are the carotenoids. Those are doing a different process in the plant. They're not just there to make it look pretty or whatever. Like there's different things that are going on in the metabolism side and all of that.
They are specific light responses. Yes, they are part of the specific light responses. Go ahead.
Well, since we took plants indoors and started cultivating in fake sunlight, look how our plants have now gotten actually sick, full of diseases. From hops laden to getting powdery mildew so easily acceptable, where when they're outdoors and grown in natural sunlight, it kind of reverts the plant back to a natural state where it can fight off of most of these problems that start to occur over time.
I'm gonna try that actually this year, Eagle. I got a couple of them I'm gonna put outdoor just to see if I can get really healthy, vibrant growth going, and then take another cutting to bring back indoor and see if it does a lot better.
A month or less, you'll see.
Yeah.
Yep.
Turn around 100%. All right, man. I'm gonna have videos on it, so we'll see. We're gonna see.
Yeah, and also like outdoor, man, it's amazing what that does for vibrance. It really is. You'll be amazed. Like you said, a month, man. I struggle for so long with those like 400 watt MH and HPS lights, man. I didn't realize how deficient my lighting was until I got these LEDs. But man, I just struggle and hang on to get out in sunlight. And then once I get out in that sun, man, let's go.
A lot of my shit that my outdoor experience is limited. You know what I mean? When I'm putting things outdoors, it's for one reason or another. And plant count has always been one of those things. So there's been many a times I've harvested a plant and wanted to keep it, but didn't want to keep it in my plant count. So I've stashed it like in the back 40 and let it do its thing. You know what I mean? And some of my best re-veggies have been some of the I don't give a fuck in the back 40 and go out there once it's done its thing and take some of them rejuvenated fucking clones, and they come back just beautiful. And where I've struggled to re-veg fucking plants indoors. You know what I mean? Just literally, there has to be a little something extra with that sunlight that just pushes that process.
Well, look
further.
at the different rays of spectrum, from ultraviolet to infrared to gamma, like that. The sun is putting out so many different rays that even ultraviolet, like our plants are getting more of a spectrum from the sun than we could ever do and produce indoors at the moment. Maybe another 10, 20, 30 years, we learn to figure out how to get these spectrums, but
I think that we don't even begin to start to understand the full spectrum that the sun emits. I think we are arrogant in what we think we know. And I think in a long time from now, we're going to look back and go, God, were we arrogant sons of bitches?
Oh, dude,
And
we've had that all along, but they've already started to learn that too. Like originally, that's where the blurple lights came about. Is they thought the only spectrum ranges that were triggering photosynthetic activity were in those zones, and now the more they're learning about more about it, they're learning that that's actually really a lot wider, and the greens are doing. There's all kinds of different stuff going on, so that's why. But that was how that all changed over time was the idea of, oh, we see these two spectrums are responsible. So if we're going to make the most efficient light to grow plant, then that's going to be the most efficient way is only power those spectrums or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. That there was one guy that Wolf, I think was his name, but he's studied lighting and talked about I like the way he described it as almost like similar to sound or music, to where like almost the different colors of the spectrum are kind of almost playing different notes of a song to the plant. And there's like really the comparison would be like having a 4-band quartet or whatever playing versus a full orchestra with all the extras and all, you know what I mean? It's like that as far as music wise would be a similar comparison for like spectrum ones.
Yeah, can I go off on that a bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys may or may not know I'm also into radio. I'm an amateur radio operator. So I do a lot of stuff with radio, and we do a lot of stuff with alternate parts of the radio spectrum, which is part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, which includes the light spectrum that we recognize, which is part of the sun's total emission spectrum, right? It's really interesting when you start to go above and below the red and infrared and ultraviolet parts of the range. You get into some really weird parts of the range, and they have some really interesting effects. For example, in the ultraviolet range, around 380 nanometers, there's a range that you can actually look at live human blood samples under something called a somatoscope, developed by a name Gaston's something, I forget his name. But you could actually look at live blood samples, and he was actually able to determine that there was an epigenetic cycle in blood, and depending on human nutrition, it changed the blood morphology, and then it would evolve into a yeast, into a bacteria, into a healthy blood, into a whatever, based on nutrition. So like that spectrum thing is infinitely interesting. And more recently, Tom Dykstra has come out with some new research regarding insects, with a new theory that they actually don't smell plant phenolic compounds, that instead they actually detect them spectrally, that they actually are able to sense them from a resonance standpoint. Okay, now if we go back, there was a Russian dude who made a floating craft out of beetle wings. Okay, spectrum, man, I'm telling you, I think we're missing a lot of the pieces and parts of the sun. These LED lights are amazing, but I'd love to see what like 500 years from now technology could do. I bet it would be just blow us the hell away.
I was just watching a thing how bees are like, I think I might get this wrong, but the bees were positively charged and the plant pollen was like a negative charge.
Talk
So
about
so when a bee was flying by, it would detect that a flower had a lot of pollen on it, and when it landed, it was almost like a magnetic effect to the legs or whatever, like you see them all the pollen around them. And then it would leave that plant. It would take that, and the next bee would detect that, and that there wasn't as much pollen there, and they wouldn't waste their time. They would just keep moving. I thought that was, yeah, that was pretty cool.
Well, and then we can extend that thought. There's a whole radionics field where you can actually grow plants. You can tune a whole farm based on radio frequencies. You can actually tune the frequency of the farm and adjust everything. And that's
Well,
something like advancing new agriculture is actually looking to develop right now. That's one of the groundbreaking things that they're working on as they're releasing all their SAP analysis stuff. That's where they're headed next. So
wasn't there a Russian scientist or somebody that discovered like plants have auras too?
yes, Gestadov, or it was something with a G, Galvadov. You can actually
They
photograph oral spectrums or something like that. Yeah,
take a plant leaf and clip it off and literally photograph it, and you can see the aura, and you could then remove the leaf and kind of still see the energy frequency or pattern still there.
and
Pretty interesting.
yes, 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 and that correlates also over to Dr. Masaru Emoto and his work on the memory of water, which of course correlates over to the fourth phase of water with Dr. Gerald Pollack. That's a much more scientific end of the spectrum. I can go on and on and on, but just suffice to say that spectrum, resonance, frequency, and energy are all a huge factor in this. You should probably not ignore it, and you should probably be paying close attention to what sort of emotional energy you expose your plants to, and while you're at it, what you expose yourself to, because it can have a huge effect on you.
I believe that what you're saying is 100% true, and it kind of ties what you're saying and what he kind of asked about the rainforest and not, plants not being able to get the proper light, things being able to survive underneath that giant camping. I think at some point it is a little bit of that frequency that, you know what I mean, helps tickle the plant into, growing without the sun. And then I think a little bit of it's the spectrum that you've talked about as well. We can't necessarily see the full spectrum or put out measure kind of the power of that sun, the actual penetration. We see, we're thinking a few leaves and the sun's not penetrating through that, but we know now that grains and stuff like that do penetrate way, and you're not at the power of the sun. Not at the power of the sun. So just to say we're not seeing those visible don't mean they're not actually there. They're like that's kind of what I was getting at. If you can walk around, there's light there. You know what I mean? There's got to be enough of something there for plants to be able to survive on.
And
It's not as intense as direct sunlight. It's probably equal to what a closet in our grow room is putting out.
there's a whole new field of science evolving around that right now that is absolutely mind-blowing, fascinating. But one thing I will say, there was an experiment done, and I've been meaning to replicate this, and I have to burn my ass to get back to it because I have to replicate this experiment. A guy took, I forget where it was. I have somewhere in my archives. I have it. I'll dig it up. I'll share it with you guys or whatever. The guy he took metal plates. I think they were like aluminum or copper plates on top and on the bottom, grounding plate and like a transmission plate, effectively. Ran like copper grounding strap up to shiny metal plates on the roof to collect sunlight energy. And the ground plate went to a grounding rod. The plants in soil in a box with no light, the box totally closed from light, just airflow. And he grew plants with chlorophyll, green growing plants without any light using that method. I don't know. I haven't replicated the experiments. I can't validate it yet, but it intrigues the living hell out of me. And the only what I know so far about plants being antennas, radionics, spectrum, all that kind of stuff. I wonder if it's actually possible. Maybe we're crazy using all these grow lights. Maybe all we need is a couple of metal panels on our roof.
like can be a yeah. So when do you think that we'll catch up and actually find out what the plant needs? I mean, are we light years or are we like AI away from like, dialing in the secret recipe for plants? I mean, it's weird that thing we all watched with How Can Plants Talk and the way AI deciphered all that shit in no time. And so, do you think before long that it's gonna, know the recipe of every individual plant?
I think as the spectral analysis technology evolves, I think we're going to be able to tune everything per plant, per person, per very fine tuned. I think as that technology and understanding grows, how fast it's going to happen.
I think the more we learn, the wider the gaps get.
That's a good point too.
I mean, really, that's like the more we learn about it, the more complex everything gets. The more you try to dive into what interactions happen in the soil, the more complex it gets. The more, I mean, there's this depth on depth on depth. It's like that's, I don't know. That's kind of been what I've seen. It's like the more we learn, the wider the gaps get.
Probably a very true statement.
You got a good point there. I mean, the more we learn, the more questions come up, right? So maybe you're right.
That's why, like, a lot of it now, like from what I've seen, is going into like systems biology, where they're trying to understand how systems operate versus the reduced form. The reductionists look at it like reducing everything down to just this one thing and seeing what it does. But we're learning that things operate differently when in the community or when they're mixed with other things. And you were talking earlier, there's pathogens that when there's a full, complete, spectrum of other biological life around them, they're actually a benefit, when they become a benefit or whatever. It's only in certain scenarios when they're turned into a pathogen.
That was a neat thing too. I watched in that same thing about trees. They talked about tomatoes and just through the root system there, if one tomato plant they found got attacked by worms, powdery mildew, whatever, it sent signals to the other tomato plants to secrete different enzymes to protect themselves, and so there was plants right next to each other that didn't get the PM or the worm attack because it had plenty of notice, if you will, through the root system from it talking and being prepared.
But it's just not the root system it does it through. It actually like screams a vibration or frequency when it's being attacked or it needs nutrients. This is something real recent that's come up that they've talked about, that they've actually been able to record this and these plants making sounds when they needed water or different nutrients. So it's interesting that not only are we understanding that plants are communicating through the root zone, but sending out like screaming frequencies through the air.
But wait, there's more. But wait, there's more. Because they also communicate by scent.
Yep, chemical.
And there's more, and there's more, and there's more. This is what I'm talking about. The spectrum frequency thing. We're looking at a tiny little fraction of what is a huge, huge band of different operating frequencies or channels, for lack of a better way to say it. I think we really don't have any clue how many channels there really are.
I think there's way more than you think about too. And it's like Smiley kind of hinted to, the more we learn, the more we it widens what we know. So we find out in one instance, oh yeah, 3 point whatever fucking is great for corn. We're gonna blast our fields with corn. Now, is that like all is that going to send out a signal to what that we don't know that's going to fucking have a run response? You know what I mean? It killed off everything else around it that was beneficial for the corn. But you know, if we supplement the corn with, with what it was getting from that, now we're really kicking ass. But we've killed off all the shit because now you know what I mean? More we learn, I we widen the gaps and fucking make it.
Like any other part of our evolution, right? All we can do is apply the best knowledge that we have to date to the best way we can and practice it the best way we can and learn from that mistake. Because inevitably it'll probably be a mistake in some form or fashion, whether we get good results or not. It's probably some form of mistake. It's a question of how do we hone it, refine it, and make it less of a mistake at each level, right? I mean, all you can do is be a better person than you were yesterday, right? You can't be better than somebody else. You can only be better than yourself yesterday. I think the same applies for our growing practices. We're ever evolving, ever growing. My practices have evolved dramatically, and I know I'll look back probably even in a couple years and go, God damn, I was doing that. Oh, I wish I'd known better.
And that's why I say I don't ever and will never call myself a master grower. And for all the people that call themselves master growers are idiots, because there is always new information coming out about the plant physiology and how soil biology reacts with it. And like, we're learning so much still that why would you even say you're a master?
If you can even find me in the forums, you'll see it's a regenerative ag student.
Well, just the whole like rhizophagy thing's been flipping it all, the whole line of thinking on it all. You know what I mean? Like just one discovery away from all these theories being proved false and whatever. Go with what you experience, know, and see. I guess.
Well, and that's the nice thing about going down this wormhole that we've been going down, is look at how far down the information goes and how much still is being learned and retaught and stuff that was found like back in the 50s and 40s. Researchers are now finding out to be true. And oh my God, now we need to start looking at that research again. And so it's so complex that why would you limit yourself to thinking you know everything about the plant? Like, I still hear new information all the time about different plant pathogens that are attacking cannabis. If you're a master, did you know about these new ones? I mean, no, because you didn't know about it because nobody knew about it until they started recently attacking the plants. And so it's new information about all these new viruses that are coming out really attacking cannabis. And so, like, we need to be aware of what our learning curve is. And if it's getting above our head, oh, hey, back away a little bit till you start to understand. If you want to dive deep head first, it might get a little interesting on trying to understand the information. I know Eagle struggles sometimes. That's why he enjoys these conversations. Ha.
I don't struggle. I'm a hell of a grower, but I'm not a master grower. But that reminds me that as I've listened to you talking, and I've said this a lot too, fucking as I look back at a lot of my older pictures in like some of the recent more years and shit, I think like, damn, I was fucking crushing it back then, and I didn't do half of this shit. You know what I mean? I wonder a lot of times how much time I've set myself back, as you guys pointed out, going, God damn, monster cropping's a new thing, huh? I'm gonna pinch between every fucking node. Click, 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 click. Oh, and fucking I'm gonna do it to every one of my plants. This whole crop. Yeah. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But did I fucking set, a whole crop back, or you know what I mean? A few crops back? Hoping and trying and wishing and fucking trying to push my plant forward when I look back at the when I just fucking fed and checked my water, picked them up every day and fed. Them plants had big old fucking beautiful plants. None of them fucked up. I look back at the when I started fucking trying to tweak everything and fucking stress is good. I need to that's when my fucking shit goes up and down. And when I kept it simple and just it watered and fucking pictures show it. My pictures show it. Yeah, that's what it is.
A friend of mine always used to say, let's not outsmart ourselves.
I agree. But to what you say there, medically fit, I may struggle for the proper terms, but I do kind of see things in my head the way they should work. I just kind of struggle to put them into words properly, or I haven't learned proper terminology to explain what I know is going on. Doesn't necessarily I don't understand the processes per se, but I have been doing this a very long time, and I do understand how to grow cannabis very well. Again, to throw the technical terms, I mean the organic side of this, I've not bullshitted anybody or will bullshit anybody. The deeper dive into the soil and understanding how things work, and that's new. That's new. But feeding, watering, in my cocoa system, I've always been comfortable with. Growing in general, very good. I mean, I can bring out pictures. We can go finish out the next day or so and just beautiful bud pictures. Yeah, but yeah, I understand, but I do learn a lot from you guys. I mean, honestly, I don't know it all. I thank you guys for that shit. You guys do teach me quite a bit, but to say I don't know or I'm not a good grower.
No, never said that. Never said that. Just saying the wormhole of information that we are going down, sometimes it's overwhelming to understand some of it.
I
had
Because
for you guys, I wasn't even on. I was wandering around here after the shower and shit going, well, I don't even want to get it where I already went. What about sand as a filter? If it doesn't have any nutrients, it's got to be picking up something. Is it just the density of the fan of the sand that makes it a good filter? I mean,
Eagle, I didn't hear
I got tons of questions.
I didn't hear him dish your growing at all, dude. I think he was just explaining to everyone that just how complex all this shit really is. And the more we dig into it, literally, the deeper we dig ourselves.
It's a very complex thing. And like I've said this a lot, it isn't just about the journey into the soil. I've learned a lot of spiritual shit in the last few years of trying to dig in and understand the soil. It can, and I've said this, it can be a very easy, simple system to grow wheat. To understand how organics and everything works is not fucking easy. Not even close. I mean, you could probably spend your whole lifetime into diving into every one of these little wormholes because they're fucking deep. Each one of these little systems that you guys refer to, yeah, you know what I mean? I kind of understand how they all work, how deep them rabbit holes go, and that's where you guys come in. I haven't opened them doors. I'm still scared to open them doors because I know how time consuming each one of those little processes can be. You know what I mean? And how they all work together and all that good shit. Yeah. That part can be confusing. That's why I kind of, and I'm not gonna bullshit anybody. That's why I've stayed to the cocoa side of things. At any one time, man, you see trouble, a good flush and a good feeding, you can be back on track. Soil it spins out in soil. Like even as we were talking about, like with the light thing, Smiley, you kind of brought this up a little bit with too much light. I've had problems with LEDs, certain LEDs, not all LEDs, vegging 24 hours and them plants creating a lockout because of too much of that fucking light. They didn't like it. It's simply, you fucking take it back to 18.6, them plants would be good. 24 hours under that LED, you'd see all kinds of fucking deficiencies. And now again, now I'm chasing and trying to figure out what the fuck's going on in the soil. It didn't strike me that the plant or the actual light itself, you know what I mean? Because I ran 24-hour veg fluorescent, no problem. I switched that over to certain brands of LED now, 24 hours. Now I've got lockouts, problems. Now I'm chasing, you know what I mean? Nutrient deficiencies and thinking, you know what I mean? It's my feeding regimen or I'm doing wrong when it was a simple light fucking problem. You know what I mean?
So,
sorry, go ahead, Carl.
I just got a question. You know, a while back, you had, I forget, you had a couple different people on. I think Med Fit actually was one of them. You guys were talking about lighting pretty extensively. Was that you, Med?
I don't recall. We'll discuss it some more.
Okay, well, you guys were talking about lighting, light intensity. You were talking about the, what was it, DIN or whatever, the daylight, total daylight exposure, basically.
Oh,
Right?
DIL or
Yeah.
DLI?
DLI, yep. Yes, DLI. You were talking about light cycles and using like the gas light cycle where you go 12 and then 1 hour for veg instead of running the full 18 or 16 or whatever your veg cycle is.
Yeah, how I reduce mine by 15 minutes every hour in flour.
See, yes. See, I would love, I know we really are here to talk about organics, but can we dive into that topic a little bit? Because I'd love to pick you guys' brains on that stuff. I mean, if you know, or even if you know somebody else, or could even point me to an episode that you've already done that I could learn more on
It's
that.
Fucking Lost Leaf. Any episode of mine with Lost Leaf. That's
Lost-
where the daily light integrals start.
Can you
know
spell
what I mean?
that for me?
Lost Leaf. Lost like you're lost and leaf like a leaf. Lost Leaf.
Okay,
I can
lost.
send you that link, to be honest with you. There's
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. 'Cause I want to learn more about that. Like I know a lot, but I want to know a lot more. And I know you guys, I caught bits and pieces of some of those discussions. I was like, oh shit, they really hit some awesome stuff there. I want to go back to it. So
You know, and then just to kind of touch on that a little bit, and this is the easiest way to dial in your system, your life, and that is to do a time-lapse video of your plant area. You go back and you watch that plant. At the end of the day, after that plant's, as Smiley's pointed out, had enough, that plant will drop. At that point, in my mind, shut that fucking light off. You're overworking that plant. You know what I mean? So you found the sweet spot of your light. And we've kind of talked about that. I mean, there's good episodes with me and Smiley talking about lights and fucking how to fucking. There's good fucking wormholes where we talk about that. Is it better for the plant to actually give it that light integral, hammer that number down in 4 hours? Or is it better to pull that light down, you know, turn it down and giving it the full day to go through its cycle? You know,
Well,
it is.
this is the question I'm at. Do I dial back power and run the longer daylight cycle for like in my this tent here with tomatoes and all kinds of shit in it, right? Like it's basically my veg tent. Do I dial that down to low power and use that for the efficiency gain? And is my growth going to be better doing that? Or do I run high intensity and do a 12-hour cycle instead of an 18?
Yeah, that's now that part of it I'm starting to wonder about, because now I'm seeing in my mind, again, we're the human plant analogy there, more recovery, more shit happening, more benefits happening during the night sleep recovery cycle. You know what I mean? You're ripping yourself to a certain point, and then all the benefits are happening and during recovery. So why wouldn't you want more of a recovery time to wake up and be hammered with light? And you know, and again, and then again, we're back to: do you want to hammer it, or do you want to fucking sprint, or do you want to jog? You know what I mean? Which one is better there? I mean, and again, even in as I'm looking into my training for my running, you know, there's different thoughts on that too, about sprinting and fucking splits or running the duration you want to run. I'm still kind of fucking wondering, should I be fucking running as fast as I can for 2 minutes and then 1 minute off and 2 minutes fast again? And that's the thing with the plants. I've seen, are we dialing the plant up and down? I've seen people do that. Start the plant, yeah, which is, there's a lot of, we're taking ourselves down deep rabbit holes there, but there's a lot of study being done there. But I think nowadays, a midpoint there, like I'm saying, watching your plant and kind of dialing it back. I mean, if you're doing these videos along with what you're saying, you should be able to do one cycle, light on, full blast. Now I know, shut the light off here. Okay, this run did pretty well like that. Next time, dial it back. Okay, now boom, they're shutting down at 7 hours, but I had a better fucking yield. You know what I mean? These you got to do it. Then nobody can tell you again. Nobody can tell you all. We could do scientific bullshit or whatever, but these tests, none of these tests are going to apply to your growth end. You know what I mean? Them are all things that time elapsed video in time will tell you.
Eagle, you just hit the nail on the fucking head, dude. Because that's what it all comes down to in regenerative agriculture. None of these things anybody tells you freaking really matters. You got to work it for your plant at its point in its life cycle in your environment, blah, 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 specific to what you're doing. And man, that's a brilliant idea, time lapse. And I got just the camera for that. And that makes me think I need to go back in my tent there. I got these set up to flicker back and forth around the tent. So we're switching around to give them a little bit of a rest. But I'm going to go through and set them up on all together at once, put the time lapse camera in, and I'm going to monitor the plants and we're going to see what
You'd
they
be
do.
amazed what you learn about your plants. When they doing what, them videos will fucking tell you more than you can imagine. And they're
That's
fun to watch.
So first, thank you for that. And second, the cool thing is all the different species I have here, I'll get to see what different species do too compared to each other. So that would be kind of a cool, like built-in sub experiment. So thank you for that awesome thought, dude. That's freaking awesome. That's an awesome takeaway. Thank you. I'm stoked to try that.
Well, I'm not trying to dip out again, but we're past our 2 hours. And if you guys want to roll on, roll on. But I'm like 4 hours behind schedule on getting to this run tomorrow. I still got to empty out the truck, pack bags, rest, all kinds of fun shit.
Do your thing, man. Go kick ass.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, you guys. Well, you guys gonna keep rolling, or you want to end it?
I'm down to end it. We got another topic for next week and lighting schedules apparently.
Well, guys, I appreciate you guys and thank you guys for letting me dip out for a few and try to catch up a little bit of shit. I was way past stressed at that point, but I appreciate you guys for holding it down for a little bit. And I do learn a lot. Split, I do learn a lot from you guys. Don't let me fucking discredit you guys, man, any kind of way. I do learn a lot from you guys. I was just defending myself a little bit, but I do learn a lot from you guys, even in the shower. So. But thank you guys. I appreciate
Thanks for the platform, Eagle, and thanks for firing it up for us. And appreciate you doing that too.
Well, for the rest of you guys, thank you for watching. See you guys in 2 weeks for another episode. Where you guys, you want to remind everybody where they can find you, what you got coming up real quick before we go?
Medically Fit, YouTube and Instagram.
Pharmacy Seeds Network on YouTube, Reboot Agriculture on Instagram.
Smiley_garden on Instagram and on YouTube, and smileys.angels on Instagram. Smileysangels.net.
You can find me here and running around. You guys take care. Don't forget to do something nice for somebody.